Where should you start reading when it comes to the Third Reich and World War II? It's a massive topic, millions of books out there, new ones coming out all of the time. It's one of the most studied periods in history, and with good reason. It's not only very interesting, it's super important. Now, as a tour guide in Berlin, doing tours about the Third Reich and World War II and all sorts of things, actually, I often get asked by guests on my tours, what should I go out there and read? And, I have loads of recommendations, but I thought, let's try and create a reading list that works for beginners and people who are more advanced, and let's make the reading list as good as it can possibly be by collaborating. So I've had a little conversation with some of my absolute favorite tour guides, Pip Roper, who you may know from the podcast we do together, History Flakes, and then Matti Geyer from toursofberlin.com and Finn Ballard from Finn Ballard Tours, both of whom I've made little short videos with before as well. So hopefully you've already seen their faces. And so, yeah, we sat down and had a chat for about an hour and tried to cover, the basics, and then memoirs and diaries, and also novels and in-depth books. And hopefully we've created something that is, somewhat useful. Obviously, in terms of like text and marketing, it's going to be the ultimate guidebook to blah, blah, blah. But yeah, by the nature of it, of course, you know what marketing fluff looks like. I hope that it's a solid list that's really useful, that you can save and share, maybe buy some of those books and learn all about this stuff from. So yeah, that's the conversation that follows. I hope you really enjoy it. It's a bit different to what I've been putting out lately, but I think it was quite fun. I think it went really well. I think it's a nice, easy watch and listen as well. So here it is. So we've got a group of Berlin tour guides here. And the idea is that, at the end of tours, people will often ask us, oh, I'd love to know more about this. I'd like to read books about this or this. And quite often, the tours we're doing focus on the topic of the Third Reich and World War II. So I thought we could work together to come up with a kind of a reading list, the books that we find most useful, most important, most interesting, maybe weirdest, I don't know. And so, that's why I've gathered us all here. And so, Pip, wonderful Berlin guide, comedian, and just general great and fabulous person, you're going to be our host and take us through.
Thank you so much. Well, what a good idea. We should state that there's no homework involved for anyone watching. They don't have to read these books, but it's just a nice, as you say, reading list of information. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the era of the Third Reich and Nazi Germany, I believe. So focusing on books of that time with yourself, Jenny Whitlam, but also with another two fantastic tour guides who I always really enjoy. Can I introduce, first of all, Finn?
Thank you, Pip. Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Finn from Ireland. I've been living in Berlin since 2008, and I've been guiding tours ever since. And I'm showing off a little bit sitting in front of my Nazi library. But I've been studying this history many's a year and guiding all manner of tours. And if you would like, after the talk, to find me, then if you Google me, Finn Ballard, or look me up on Instagram, Finn Ballard Tours, you'll surely find me. I'm posting a few little reels, nothing on Johnny's scale, but starting to have fun with that. And I do Zoom lectures as well as tours on any theme, anytime, any place. I'm here.
Fabulous. And it's a very impressive Nazi library, Finn.
I love when the springtime sun dapples it gently in the morning.
Of course, yes, yeah. Do you turn any of your... Sorry.
I was going to say, you posted this recently on Instagram, and I zoomed into your library. I was like, there is no book that's not on Berlin. I was very impressed.
Well, this is just the non-fiction, Matti. The fiction's in the other room,
Okay, I was wondering.
I turn around the big Hitler books. Because I don't know about you guys, I don't want anyone coming in and being like, because there's a heater that someone has to come in and check because it's very old, and it's like, I don't want them being like, whoa, didn't expect that. But anyway, moving on to Matti Geyer. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us where we can find you.
Sure, I am Matti Geyer. I am born and bred in Berlin. I've been a tour guide since exactly the same year as Finn, 2008. I started. I'm also doing all the tours. I now live in Potsdam, so I love doing Potsdam tours, but also all the Berlin tours. And you can find me on toursofberlin.com.
Excellent.
I want to add something, Matti. You can also find really wonderful little clips you do for the radio in German, admittedly, but you've started doing these little history clips on Flux FM, and they
I do,
are
yes.
fantastic.
Thank you. Exactly. And sometimes I post them on Instagram as well, but generally you can find them on Flux FM if you look up Berliner Schnipsel.
This one. And all of these links for everybody will be below as well.
So, Johnny, would you like to kick us off with your books? And would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Oh, yes. Hello. Well, this is on my YouTube channel, so hopefully you've seen me before, but if you're new, hi. I've been a guide in Berlin not quite as long as the other two lads there, 15 years. And a couple of years ago, I started making videos and people started to notice me. So a lot of those are on Instagram and TikTok and so, but yeah, this is a really nice opportunity to share the stage, share the platform with I mean, the three of you have all worked together for years and years, more than a decade. So yeah, thank you, Pip, and let's jump into it. The first book or books I wanted to mention is really just to kind of not get the basics out the way, because the basics are very important, but where I think a lot of people should start if they're like, oh, I've never read a book about this. There's a million books, like look behind Finn. A really good place for anybody to begin is with Richard Evans' trilogy, which is The Coming of the Third Reich in Power, and The Third Reich at War. And what they do is they clip along at a good pace, right? And they split it into this really easy 3 chunks, which I'm sure is going to come up again and again through this chat, right? The Weimar era, when the Nazis are, for the most part, really nothing to be reckoned with. Until they really start to gain power at the end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s. And then they look at those the next book looks at those first years in power up to the Second World War, where they seem to go from strength to strength, obliterate all different political parties. And then those final years where, it's split into success as the Nazis take over a lot of Europe, and then this collapse as they're fought back to the center. And one of the reasons I think that these books are really quite good to read is what I call the phenomenon of drowning in acronyms. There's NSDAP, SASS, WVHA, RHSA, and so on and so on and so on. And I think he doesn't bother going into these too much, and so you get a really good idea, especially, as I say, if you're new to the topic. I assume you guys will have read some of this.
Let me check, Johnny. I'm going to have one of them behind me, I do believe.
It's like
I'm all into a new order yesterday,
pantomime.
but I do have the trilogy. Yeah, they're up here somewhere. And I've also got the Michael Burleigh as a general overview, but I would defer to you indeed. Richard Evans is great. Also, I enjoyed a lot. Richard Evans wrote the Hitler Conspiracies of late, conspiracy theories about the Nazi era, about the Reichstag fire. That's fascinating as well.
Yeah, and he had a new one recently, Hitler's People. I think that was him. And this is also a really good starting point because it goes through lots of different biographies of people there. And then my next one, because that's more of a general thing, and I figured everyone would have that. So my next one is a book I really enjoyed that I read a year or two ago, which was Berlin 1936, 16 Days in August, which focuses on the Olympic Games. And it goes into quite a lot of detail, but not and then Sweden came fourth in the 500-meter swimming or something like this. It's really a good look into what it was like to live here and be here in what was obviously quite an exciting time and a high point, and was something that I think a lot of people here enjoyed. But he also, the author Oliver Hilmers, makes sure to give the undercurrent of what's going on as well, of the expulsion of Sinti and Roma from the city, setting up the Sachsenhausen camp, and he picks a few characters to follow. And again, I find it very, very accessible, very exciting, and also not something that we talk about on our tours in much detail so often. So it was quite fun to get a bit of an escape from that.
Does anyone have any others from the if we were taking Richard Evans' approach of into 3, does anyone have any that they would recommend for the pre-power, pre-1933 phase and then the 33 to 39 phase?
I'm thinking of the ones that I was going to talk about.
That's also okay.
Um,
It was just a thought if anyone wanted to add in another like earlier kind of phase one.
I have this one. Why Hitler came into power. Theodore Abel. So he was in Germany, or Theodore Abel, I think he was an American chap who traveled to Germany in 1934 to observe the Germans and report back, essentially.
Excellent. I'm also making a running list of any ones that we're adding as well. So
Thank you.
Johnny, do you want to do Mouse then?
Yeah, that's the next one on my list, which is a book that I really overlooked for a long time because it's a picture book, it's a comic, right? And I thought, oh, I couldn't possibly take that seriously, and I just I picked it up only 3 or 4 years ago, and far too late. I should have read this immediately. It's Mouse, you can clip through in a weekend, and I really defy anybody to put it down once they've started. It's such a gripping story written by Art Spiegelman, but it's the story of his dad and what he went through as the war began. Guys, you'll have to remind me. Was he Czech or Polish?
I'm not sure.
I think he was Czech. Either way, I apologize for getting it wrong. But yeah. The invasion comes, he flees to here, he's locked up in this place, in this ghetto, he's sent to Auschwitz, all these terrible things, but it's interspersed with present day, being like the 70s or 80s, present day interviews between the author and artist Art Spiegelman and his father. And his father's this grumpy, cantankerous, terrible old man who's really difficult to deal with, and I think I enjoy how much that humanizes it. And, this is an Auschwitz survivor, certainly somebody very much worth listening to and learning from. But I think we have a tendency as well to deify anybody who went through this completely unjust experience. And in a way, they're not humanized always, the victims of this. And so, yeah, this is what stands out to me about it. And then on a similar note, my final book that I would recommend to people is A Woman in Berlin, which is the diary of an anonymous author who was, in Berlin during the battle, and she talks about hearing the front line coming closer, and then it's on top of her, and then it goes past, and it talks about, again, the human experience of what it was like to be here in this battle as a woman when so many women were brutally attacked by the Soviets. But that's not all that the book is about. I think it's often reduced to just that. And again, you get to see this kind of personal experience rather than this big picture stuff like I recommended with Richard Evans. So yeah, those are the 4 I wanted to bring.
Nice. Art Spiegelman's family was Polish.
Thank you.
I just looked that up. I didn't know.
Nice fact-checking.
Fact-checking in real time. So thank you, Johnny. Excellent. Yeah, nice broad kind of cross-section there. Is anyone particularly feeling that, Finn, Matti, any of your books leading on ideally from that where you'd like to jump in, or are you going to be really polite about it?
I would have one for sure. So when Johnny's speaking about A Woman in Berlin, about this diary, then I'm thinking of one of the books I've chosen, which is The End by Ian Kershaw. Actually, it's about 1944 into 45, so really protracted last 6 months or so of the war. And I've been thinking a great deal about the Battle of Berlin specifically, of course, and the war's end, since we are going to commemorate the 80th anniversary thereof very soon. And this book, The End, is very, very powerful to me because Kershaw asks simply why it is that there was not a capitulation until the very, very last moment. So why is it that so many people continue to follow and continue to commit atrocities right up until the very last moment? And you won't forget the opening of the book if you have read it, about a terrible situation that befell, well, a young man who was executed, and a matter of moments really before the Americans arrived. 4 hours later, it is said that they entered the town in which he had been killed. And so I wonder what that moment then of transition from the morning to the evening must have been like. And I think this is a really masterful look at not just a historical and military chronology, but also the psychological forces at play. And so, of course, I've been thinking a great deal about particularly those women, as Johnny alludes to in that book, and to how it was to be here in Berlin, specifically in the last days of the war.
Matti, Yeah, you had a diary, right?
Yes, exactly. It's a diary that I've chosen that I came across on an excursion to Seelow Heights, which was the final battle before the Battle of Berlin. And another tour guide, a fellow tour guide, recommended it. In German, it's called Totentanz Berlin. I think in English, it's called Berlin Soldier, simply. Helmut Altner wrote it, and he was a 17-year-old who was drafted to fight in the Battle of Seelow and then the Battle of Berlin. As were many, as we know, teenagers and Hitler Youth boys as young as, 12 years old had to fight and were very, very badly equipped. And he describes going into, like, he was, as were many youth, actually quite enthusiastic and wanted to be a soldier. But then obviously as soon as he witnesses what's going on, they actually get away from Seelow to Berlin, and then he has to defend Spandau, and describes how a lot of high-ranking politicians are still able to get out of the city, whereas a lot of average folks are hindered to get out, can't get out, and he manages to survive. And it's just I thought it was a really interesting read to have that first-hand diary, the experience.
Excellent. So, Finn, do you want to go in on any of you? Sorry. Which others did you have on your list?
So, Pip, one that I'm also thinking of, and that sounds fascinating, Matti. I would very much like to read that. I was thinking as well when Johnny mentioned Maus, I didn't pick any books pertaining to the concentration camps, although, of course, there are so very many and so very many memoirs, and all of great value. But I picked a different book in a way. It's called An Underground Life, and this is an autobiography written by a young man who very nearly could have been in a concentration camp, but simply by virtue of the passage of time, he was not. He was captured by the Nazis, but at the very, very end. So he was in the Gestapo prison when the Soviets arrived. But Gad Beck, he wrote this book with a friend of mine, Frank Heibert. So it's a mutual project, let's say. And Gad passed away some years ago. But at the moment, I do believe Frank is trying to get this adapted into a movie or a TV series. So I really hope that will happen soon. But Gad Beck was a Jewish teenager. Actually, in the Nazi parlance, he was a so-called half-Jew, but he identified himself very strongly as Jewish, and he was a gay working-class boy when the Nazis came to power. And he, in the end, did lose his boyfriend. His boyfriend was deported, and his boyfriend, who was a so-called full Jew in Nazi parlance, he was murdered. But after the deportation of his lover, that is when Gad really involved himself in still as a teenager, in resistance. And he ended up really running a resistance group active in the Berlin underground and sustaining many Jewish people in hiding. He had contacts with the Swiss embassy still, and he was able to smuggle some people out to Switzerland. And in the end, I think he was simply above suspicion, but he was caught at the very last moment. But as you know, yes, he did survive. So it's not a concentration camp memoir, but it is a memoir by a figure engaged in resistance. And I find, first of all, that the topic of LGBT and gay history is of great interest to me, but also the story of the resistance efforts in Germany. I'm not sure if we can quite say the German resistance, because I think that would imply maybe more cohesion, but he was a major resistance leader in his own right, a working class gay Jewish boy. And what I find really remarkable is that he coins this term in the book, proletarian. So he talks about working class Aryan people, and he says proletarian with a Y. And he says, really, there was a lot of solidarity among working class people, be they Jewish or not. And he found a lot of support from, yes, so-called Aryan people who were not Nazis. And that, I think, is very important. And I'm very grateful that this book was written because, of course, also with Gad not having children, of course, such stories often are simply lost. And so that's a very powerful book for me. And I think about it often on Jewish Berlin tours.
Yeah, I've watched a short interview with Gad Beck at the Rosenstrasse Memorial. So he's talking about, he was locked up ready to be deported in 1943, and how mostly women came out to protest and save people like him. And I mean, that's a story that obviously the four of us know and we talk about quite a lot. But what I really loved about this interview was that you could tell that there was, like, he seemed like quite a fun character, actually, and was one of these people, and you will know more than me, Finn, but he seemed to be one of those people who was really able to talk about what he did and what happened to him, whereas so many people obviously can't. And which is of course completely fine. But there are those few people who are not just able to talk, but therefore able to educate us. He passed away, I believe, just around 10 years ago. And I wish I'd known his story sooner and would have been able to bump into him in town.
Yes, he was actually a tour guide in his own right. He would lead tours about and explain these stories. So really an incredible character.
So, Finn, question for you, more specifically focusing on queer history. Any other specific books that you'd recommend? Also, maybe we can sneakily sneak in a precursory Weimar era book if there is one that you think maybe. Is there anything you think kind of like guides us to the edge, that kind of thing?
Absolutely, Pip. So I didn't include it just because we're really focusing on the Nazi era, but the book to read is Gay Berlin, simply Gay Berlin by Robert Beachy, and that just takes you up to 1933. So as I understand, I do believe he's working on a sequel to that, but that's the book to lead you up to 33, to lead you up to the disaster for sure.
And then leading on from also another thought, so I got two themes I got from that was thinking about queer history, but also maybe mentioning concentration camp history as well. What do we think? I mean, I think there's quite an obvious one, which is KL by
Nicholas Waxman.
Thank you. And yeah, anyone have any thoughts on that? Anyone want to add anything to that?
I fully recommend that book, but it is a bit of a deep one. I think it's good to have read your Richard Evans first if you're going to go to KL, would be my recommendation. It does flow very well. It focuses on everything to do with the camps. I mean, that's how he presents the book at the beginning, is like, there is no one book that covers the entire history of the camps until now. This is it. And so from the kind of first arrests in the wake of the Reichstag fire in 1933, right way to liberations at the end. And it's an endless resource for me and for stories I like to find out and tell. And it's obviously a bit of a rough read as well, but given the nature of the content, but very well written.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that before I'm going to move to Matti Geyer, because I know you've been quiet and sat patiently, Matti Geyer. But Sarah Helm's Ravensbrück was one that I read recently. Oh, sorry, parts of it. I didn't go through all of it because I'm not a masochist. And it's pretty horrendous reading, but it is, I think the way she uses individuals is really, really interesting to go through from different places and looking at, women from Germany, but also Spain and Norway and the Soviet Union. And she manages to kind of keep them all together. It's a really, really brilliant read. So I would also recommend that one. Matti, anything you want to add to those areas that we've
looking at I've been looking at my bookshelf as you're asking these questions and seeing if I have anything. And there is one book, and I also just looked up if it's available in English, and it is. And it's a biography about Marlene Dietrich and Leni Riefenstahl, a double biography by Karin Wieland. She must be German, which is obviously both about the Weimar era a lot, and then the other half would be about the Nazi era. And I don't know if she goes much about post-World War II, but obviously quite an interesting read, because in a way two quite similar women had history played out a little bit differently, but then one becomes moves to America and supports the American troops, and one does mostly propaganda films and never apologizes for it. It's
For people who aren't familiar with them, they're both actresses in the 1920s, and their careers really diverge completely during the Nazi dictatorship, and as do their post-war lives. I didn't know that such a book existed, and Pip and I in our podcast have just actually talked about Marlene Dietrich, and then I separately just made a video about Leni Riefenstahl. So those two are very fresh on both of our minds at the moment.
Yeah, actually, I enjoyed that book too. It was a good read.
So Matti, what else did you have on your list?
I also brought another book that I just remembered while looking at my bookshelf, which I thought was a really intriguing read and something completely different. I only read books in German, and this has the N-word on it in German, but it's about a black person in Nazi Germany, which is something that doesn't really get talked much about because there weren't really many black Germans at that time. And his father was from Africa and his mother was German. The father left, so he grows up a single parent with his mom in Hamburg, and describes the rise of the Nazis and how he does run into a lot of problems as playgrounds are only for Aryans. And he also is taken by the Nazi propaganda, actually, and he wanted to fight for Germany. He wanted to become a soldier, but they don't let him because he's African German, and which ultimately saves his life. And I thought it was an interesting read because it's just a perspective that isn't really talked about much. He doesn't face as heavy discrimination as Jews did, simply because the Nazis didn't care as much about African Germans as there weren't so many, but he does face, obviously, discrimination, and he does work in a factory in the end. For anyone who wonders what his life was like, that's a good read.
What was his name again? Sorry, Matti.
Hans J. Massaquoi.
Hans J. Massaquoi, thank you.
I think, Matti, he was harbored for the time by the swing kids, who I always love reading and thinking of.
Yes.
The swing Jugend. Well, mainly just how they used to greet each other, which was, hello, swing boy. Hello, old swing boy. Yes, hi. Which I think is adorable. Is there is there specific books on the swing Jugend? Do we know?
There must be. I know there's a movie with the young Kenneth Branagh, but a book I haven't read on them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I actually know where people can look, and it will be in about episode 4 or 5 of the History Flakes podcast.
What a great podcast.
Because you covered it. You told me about it, and then we would have put a reading list beneath that. So there will be some kind of addendum below this video for people to see.
I did, and now I'm wondering why. I have drawn attention to my own ignorance.
Well, literally, if I wanted to know about this, you're the person I would ask. So.
Hang on, sorry. Yeah, I was thinking more specifically about the swing Jugend, you see. But there is a fun book, which is called "Different Drummers: Jazz in the Culture of Nazi Germany" by Michael H. Cater, which I enjoyed a lot, and it was interesting, kind of like hearing about how these kind of like teenage boys are like getting secretly getting records and things from the United States, because there's kind of like a hierarchy of jazz, which is Black American jazz, white American jazz, British jazz, and then German jazz, which they don't rate. And it's really interesting. So sorry, yeah, I'm going to add that to the list as well. So where are we up to? What are we thinking? Has anyone had anything sparked that they want to add to the list now?
Did you have all your books, Finn, mentioned?
Well, Matti, if I may say, you actually sparked another thought, which is just thinking about the experiences of people of color in Nazi Germany. And there's a remarkable book which is called Anna and Dr. Helmy by Ronan Steinke. And that's about this gentleman, Mohammed Helmy, who was Egyptian, and he was a doctor living in Berlin. And of course, the Nazis didn't see him as an Aryan, but they were very befuddled by him, and he was a very prestigious figure. So he was able to convince them, because they were not, of course, highly intelligent people, that he was Egyptian royalty. It really is an incredible story. And also that he was a very convinced Nazi. Of course, he was anything but. So he was briefly incarcerated by them, but he talked his way out of that. And then he was harboring a Jewish family. And the daughter of this family, he employed her essentially as his medical assistant. She fervently wanted to become a doctor, which of course was inconceivable. And he passed her off as being his niece. And there's a really incredible part of the story whereby he was summoned to the Gestapo headquarters. So you can only imagine his apprehension. And he was also asked to bring his assistant. And so he turned up with this teenage Jewish girl, who of course was pretending to be an Arab, and they were speaking a kind of pidgin Arabic. I mean, she didn't speak any Arabic, and they were there not to be arrested by the Gestapo, but to meet the Mufti of Jerusalem, who was visiting. So you can only imagine, and of course they were trying to talk to her, and she was just behind her headscarf, giggling and acting very coy. And in the end, they found that very charming and left her alone. But imagine that there was, for the time, unbeknownst to the Nazis, this Jewish girl present in the Gestapo headquarters. So everybody made it. It's a really incredible tale, and they were lifelong friends. But that's a really phenomenal story as well.
And Matti, you had a couple more in your list there.
Yeah, I was going to talk about one book which has a bit of a Potsdam connection now that I live here. House by the Lake, I think is the English title, isn't it? Thomas Harding, I believe, is the author who researches his family home because it was built by his, I want to say grandfather, who was a wealthy Jewish doctor in Berlin who purchases this house by the lake in Groß-Glienicke, which is north of Potsdam. And enjoys his summers there. Einstein was a guest there, apparently, friends with him. And then obviously when the Nazis come to power, they have to leave the country and they have to let go of the house, basically, and give it up for hardly any money. And this other man, basically the book tells the story of all these different families that lived in the house over the time. And therefore, through their stories, it tells the story of both Weimar, Berlin, World War II, and then also it goes into East Germany because the house stood exactly on the border, like the wall ran through the garden. And the man that moves in then during the Nazi period is a songwriter, made quite a lot of famous tunes at his time. He lives there during the Nazi era, and if I remember correctly, he ultimately hides friends in the building. I can't remember if they're Jewish or not, but in the final years of the final months of World War II, there are people hiding in the building. And then he also describes what they experienced, like the Battle of Berlin closing in. I visited the house last year. There are bullet holes, or there's like 1 or 2 bullet holes that were there. And the author describes it also from a perspective that he goes back to the building, I think in the 90s, and meets the people who live there, who are of course a bit like, they've lived there throughout East German times, and now the descendants of the old owners are coming. There's a bit of hostility there, and his family are in England at this point. They don't want anything to do with their German, this German building anymore. And he basically starts researching, finds out all the biographies of all the people that lived there, makes it into a book. The building is now a museum you can visit. And I recommend that too.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I should like to visit the museum because that I feel is a criminally under-visited part of town or nearby, because there's a couple of very nice lakes there that feel a little bit hidden, let's say, and also a restaurant, Ritter something, where I got a cracking schnitzel with a fried egg on top. Whoever thought of putting a fried egg on schnitzel, winner. So, sorry to take your poignant story there, but
I have not come across this restaurant.
Johnny, do you have any? Would you add anything about? Because you've done quite a lot of research for Grunewald and kind of thinking about the house of. I know that you were asked to move on from outside. Was it Reinhard Heydrich's house? He's not anymore.
I was.
Obviously.
No, it's not his anymore. No, he gave it up when I guess he was when he died in hospital. Nikolassee is where he lives, so a little bit further south. I have to say I didn't read a particular biography on him. I think he's one of those ones where as a tour guide, you just through all of these books you end up just knowing his story because he's so important, being so high up in the SS. So actually, I'm going to kind of take your bait and recommend one other book, which I know you kind of. I just assume that you hate because we talked about. Is
it about tanks?
Because, yeah, exactly. It's really about.
Don't have
tanks.
a problem with tanks.
No. So again, we did a podcast episode looking at Seelow Heights and the Battle of Berlin, and I, in preparation for that, I bought this absolute
doorstopper thing. It looked like a normal book on the internet. This is the problem. And then I got Bloody Streets, and it's like this big, A4 size and about an inch thick. And then it comes with an extra supplementary book of maps. And it's quite hard to get through, to be honest. And the index could even be a lot better. So it's quite hard to find individual things. But you can open at any random page and you can find like quite engaging stories once you pass through it a little bit. One that sticks out for me is, for example, of a football player, Hanna Zorbeck. He kind of, the only time a Berlin team has ever won the German league was end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s. Hertha Berlin win twice. He comes back. He's the top scorer. He holds up the trophy. There's this kind of wonderful moment for Berlin football, but he's actually in the Battle of Berlin as well, right at the end, and it tells the story of how he then escaped through the U-Bahn at Stadtmitte, going up to Friedrichstrasse, and this kind of last-minute breakout, and then he gets to the other side, and he's like, "Look, fellas, I'm a sports guy." And he survives because he's charming, I think, and he knows that well. And so, to be honest, in the spirit of this reading list so far, I would rank this probably last because it is so hyper specific. But if you want to know every bullet that was fired in the Battle of Berlin, Bloody Streets is your tome. But there are better starting places, to be honest.
And so, does anyone have anything they wanted to add to to proper war chat?
I'll definitely be ordering this Bloody Streets. That sounds really fascinating.
It'll cost you €100, mate.
My goodness me.
Yeah.
But it sounds exhaustive, which is what we want. There's also the Berlin Battlefield Guide, Tony Letizier, but this sounds much more detailed even. And if we're talking...
From people who know them both, I know that people prefer Letizier's book.
Okay.
That's not the one I bought.
But if we're talking about Heydrich, then definitely Peter Longerich's book on the Wannsee Conference and Laurent Binet's book, HHHH. That's really fantastic. It's about his efforts to write a book about Heydrich. So it's a meta book. It's a book about a book. But that's
it's a
fantastic.
novel, I thought. I've not read it, though. I've heard it's very good.
I think you would call it creative nonfiction. It's quite novelesque, but it is essentially a nonfiction, but really, really gripping.
And then, but Matti, the last one I can see on your list, and then we're through the list, but we can also add other books, is Stella.
Yeah, we kind of talked about including it, but I'm going to be also honest and say I would rank that book more towards the bottom in terms of readability. I don't know if the others, if you've read it or would agree. It wasn't the easiest read, but it's an interesting story. And we made a podcast episode about it recently where we kind of summarized the whole story. But Peter Wyden interviewed Stella Goldschlag in the 80s, just before her death, and she was one of those catchers, Greifer, Jewish Greifer, who collaborated with the Gestapo in finding other Jews in hiding and seemed to really enjoy what she was doing, maybe unlike others, and has this weird story after World War II where she becomes a crazy anti-Semite. But yeah, the book wasn't the easiest read because her story is quite fascinating, but he goes also quite into detail about sometimes not the most fascinating aspects of her life or friends' lives or his own life, right?
Yeah.
And he was also homophobic, as I've learned from Pip. So
I
maybe don't buy his book and support him.
Yeah, just borrow it. But he this was something we kind of afterwards we did that great. The recording, I really enjoyed that episode, and I think a lot of people told me that they did as well because it's a really fascinating story. And I remember afterwards being like, "Oh, did you know this about Peter Wyden?" And you were like, "No," but that's okay, right? We can find afterwards be like, as long as we have the context. But yeah, afterwards he devoted quite a lot of energy to, I think, the idea of conversion therapy for people, which is problematic. But yeah, you've said you'd rank the book relatively low anyway. So just listen to our podcast.
Listen to our episode, exactly.
So
I recommend History Flicks, the Berlin History podcast is a great place to start.
There also is the novel Stella by Takis Furger. I haven't yet read it, but that's another option perhaps. I think it's based upon her, but yes, it's Stella and she's on the cover. I think it's based very closely on her. And I think that was the inspiration for the movie, the adaptation recently, which was very harrowing indeed.
And am I right in thinking there's been a musical made about her? Which I think is...
That's news to me.
Yeah,
I think you're wrong.
don't think... Do you? I had a conversation with someone with more of a theatre background who was like, oh yeah, there's a musical about her. And I was like, I don't think that I dreamt this, but but like with sometimes the amount
absolutely Googling this.
Yeah, please Google immediately, because maybe I dreamt it. Maybe it's finally gotten to me, and it's sorry.
I think there might be. I don't know. It needs further Googling.
Yeah.
But you could be right. Matti Geyer, lover of musicals and history. This is your time to shine.
I don't know.
Finn, there's one more on your list I saw, which I've heard is quite controversial, which is Blitzed.
Well, I wasn't aware that it was controversial. I know that it was very revelatory, as in it showed us the extent of drug consumption. But what's the controversy about it?
All I've heard is that there are some inaccuracies. I've not read the book and I've not delved into that. Matti, you're also looking at me quizzically, so perhaps I'm completely wrong about that.
I think maybe what you mean. I also read that there were complaints later about how he makes it all about drugs and blames a lot of things on the drugs, and maybe some people thought that was maybe too easy of an answer.
Oh, that's interesting.
I thought it was a fascinating read. Totally changed some of my understanding of the war.
And the author of that again, please.
Norman Ohler.
Norman Ohler, thank you.
He's written a new one now about mind control experiments.
Could you tell us a bit more about Blitz for people who don't know? I feel like we glossed over it.
Sure, Johnny. So Blitzed is about, it's a great title. Of course, that's the English translation. But Blitzed is about drug consumption in the inner circle of the Nazi party, all the way to the end in the bunker, but also among troops and among civilians. And so just as Matti said, I think it does give us a new lens through which to look at the atrocities that were committed. We understand not only German troops took a lot of drugs in the last days throughout the war, but particularly in the last days. But it also shows us how specifically the drug that we today would call meth or methamphetamines were created as a stimulant for the German army. So of course, yes, when you can imagine how it was that they were able to, as Churchill said, I think Churchill said the greatest surprise of his life was how fast the Germans advanced on France, for instance, in 1940. So yes, it gives us an idea of how they were able to plow on with the war, but it also shows us perhaps the kind of catatonia in which many people might have found themselves. And I think Matti's absolutely right that could not be seen as any kind of excuse. So I'm curious to hear that there was that backlash against the book, but perhaps it does help us to fathom how people were in a kind of altered state of consciousness. Really interesting read, but okay, then it needs to be maybe interrogated a bit further. And yes, of course, I don't think it could be said that there's any excuse that drugs could be the explanation behind the atrocities, but maybe they could help us to understand a little bit about
playing a
what
big
kind
part
of
also,
state
right,
of mind people were
in the final years of Hitler, where we all know that he became more and more delusional and detached from reality.
Certainly, but yes, you can't blame drugs for all of it because people in Berlin today take a lot of drugs. There is that. I should say, when that book first came out, it was very, very, very popular, and a lot of guests on my tours would ask about it and so on. And so perhaps that's why I have it in my head that it's got these inaccuracies, because anything that becomes that popular ends up really under a microscope, and there's always a little backlash to these kind of things. So again, I do want to reiterate, I have not read it. I'm just remembering something from about 10 years ago, blah, blah, blah. So please don't put any stock or any weight in that, anyone who has read it or does want to.
So, sorry, I don't think I have in front of me I've not got all of Finn's books, but was that all of Finn's books?
There's only one more.
Finn. There's
I
one
had
more.
one
Excellent.
more, yes, and that was inspired by Matti's inclusion of Thomas Harding's book. So there's another great book by Thomas Harding called Hans and Rudolph, which is absolutely gripping, and that's about Thomas Harding's great uncle, Hans Alexander, who was a very dashing Berliner Jew who was able to get to the UK and ended up in the British Army. And at the beginning, he was an interpreter during the interrogations in 1945 of captured Germans, but he set himself a task to track down the Auschwitz commandant, Rudolf Hess, about whom, for instance, the Zone of Interest, the movie, which was so popular recently, is centered around his life, of course. And he did, as you know. Hess was captured, and it was really down to Hans Alexander. And so the book juxtaposes each of them, a chapter on Hans Alexander, a chapter on Rudolf Hess, until they finally meet. And that is an incredible structure and, of course, just an incredible tale. That is one of my top recommendations for sure.
Awesome. So that's all of our listed books. But has anyone got any that they've continued to be sparked?
Maybe Finn should talk us through his entire bookshelf.
Yeah, that's really what this should have been.
If I'm going to really show off, I was given this book the other day, but it's in German and it's a tome. So I hope that I will make my way through it. But this is the brand new one. You could also wait for the English translation. But Peter Longerich, of course, is one of the most highly accredited historians. And I'm very, very intrigued to see if I can get through this in German. But it's all about opinion polls. And I had no idea that there was such a thing in Nazi Germany. And apparently they were really quite negative, let's say. And so, yes, he's casting perhaps a new light, at least so say the reviews of it so far, on the people of the Third Reich, to show us that they really were not as they are often described, blindly following and such like, and that they did find ways to manifest acts of disquiet, if not resistance. Oh, and then if I do think of that, then for sure, as a novel, Alone in Berlin by Hans Fallada, one of my favorite books of all time, about a small act of resistance, albeit it had deadly consequences. But that's something I think, and not to overlook if we're talking about fiction for the moment as well.
Alone in Berlin is also closely based on a true story, is my understanding.
That's right.
Finn, you told me that you show the Stolpersteine, the little memorial plaques for the couple who wrote these postcards and put them in places, right, with just tiny things on, like telling people what lies were, what was really happening. And what strikes me about that story is it feels like, without being rude, but such an ineffective potential method of resistance, which therefore shows you, when they meet their end, how even the tiniest infraction could be the end of your life.
Absolutely, Johnny. I mean, it was a very small thing, but of course it was deadly. And in the end, the so-called good Germans, as we understand, handed in most of these postcards to the Gestapo, which is how they were able in the end to track them down. Well, they were actually denounced. They were seen by a woman who caught them in the act of dropping one of these postcards, and she straight away denounced them to the police. And all of that is just a horribly poignant story in a way. She was a woman of very little income. There's a record of the amount of money she received for her testimony, and it's this pitiful amount of pennies and shillings that she got for going to court and denouncing them. And at the end, she likely didn't even know what befell them, that they were executed. But the story goes that she was visited by a young man after the war who came to her apartment, and she'd never seen him before. He was a stranger, and he told her that they had been executed, and apparently, which they were, and apparently she had a heart attack. And it's almost certain that that was Rudolf Ditzen, who was Hans Fallada's pseudonym. So had he not discovered this case, again, they didn't have children. In the novel, they have a son, but the death of the son is what propels them to taking this activity, to doing this. But in reality, they didn't have any children. At any rate, it was actually the brother of the lady in the couple. So the author took some artistic license. But point being, it could well have been that story would have just disappeared were it not for transcription. And I just always find that a very frightening thought. How many stories are there that are lost? But you have to also wonder how many might perhaps still somehow be recreated or come to light. So that's something that gives you some hope.
Can I ask where the Stumblestones are?
Matti, they would be on Amsterdam Straße in Wedding, which is where they live. But their house is the only house on that street that was destroyed in the war. But they did a lot of this postcard dropping activity in that area in the immediate vicinity. So on Müllerstraße in Wedding, for instance. But they were caught in Schöneberg in the end. So they started to travel around the city and to leave these cards. And yeah, just as Johnny says, I mean, in the end, did it achieve a great deal? That's very hard to say. It maybe planted some little seeds of thought in people's minds. But it reminds you, of course, of Sophie Scholl and such like, and writing these leaflets. And of course, in the end, even that was a capital offense. So I think on our tours, probably we all are asked often about why there wasn't more resistance and so on. And I think it's very difficult to answer that question because I wonder that myself. I mean, if you think about the women's protest at which Gad Beck, of course, was present, I mean, he was rescued during it, then you see that there was the potential for resistance, but of course it was deadly always, and it was enormously risky. And so I think the title is the English translation, Alone in Berlin. In German, it's called Every Man Dies Alone. Well, it's the German title, but of course, that's really what they were. They were really alone, but there were such people.
You've sparked two things for me. Firstly, the Stumblestones. For anybody watching who doesn't know, these small 10-centimeter cube brass monuments that are put into the ground under the leadership of Gunther Demnig, an artist who's been doing it for around 30 years, and they tell very briefly the stories of victims of the Nazis, originally only Jews, now many more victims as well. And I came across a set the other day, and occasionally in certain parts of town where lots of Jews lived, you will see lots outside of a building. And I must have seen, I wish I had the picture in front of me, about 8, all with the same last name, which is the other thing that you reminded me of how many stories were lost. I mean, that's got to be almost an entire family that is completely wiped out. And occasionally you will see different fates befall people on those. You'll see one person manage to flee to England or so, or to Sweden. Not in this case. Every single one of them was murdered. And yeah, I had that kind of that pang of, yeah, it's a complete story. Not that I know that. They may have had many more family across the place, but that's at least the thought that hit me. Perhaps one last book from me, and then if anybody else wants to, you can jump in as well. But speaking of Hans Fallada, who wrote Alone in Berlin, there's another book of his I liked called, I think it's Little Man, What Now? And that's set around like 1930, 31, 32, and written as a contemporary book as well. So not written in hindsight in like 1938 or whatever. And it shows you the desperation that a lot of people suffered following the Wall Street crash and this huge economic crash in Germany, and just how tough it was for people, and therefore why people were totally ready to say, well, I'm going to vote for something different, be it the communists, be it the fascists. Anything would be better than what I have right now, which I don't know if that was the point of his book at all. It's a long time since I read it, but it is certainly, yeah, it gave me a better understanding for what is quite an overlooked time, and it's not all set in cities as well, is my recollection. Does anyone else want to add any last bits? Sorry, Pip.
No, I just wanted to say, what was the name of that again? Sorry, Johnny?
Oh, Little Man, What Now?
And
Matti,
also,
did you have any last ones? Sorry.
I was going to just throw in, because you started your Stumblestone thing by saying initially they were only for Jewish victims. I'm fairly sure that his first ones were for Roma victims, just to double check before you put that online. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, I will put that online with your correction. Don't worry. That's long been my understanding, so I'm happy to be corrected. I did go and try to find the first 4 the other day, because I think they were all put down on the first night. And I couldn't find them, actually. I'm very sure that a couple of them, they would be outside of a restaurant we all know called Max and Moritz, right near there, but they seem to have gone. So that was 2 of them, and I'll have to look out for the other 2. But thanks for telling me that, Matti. I really didn't know.
So yeah, any last requests? Oh, no. Any Any last book recommendations? I think part of me wanted to start off a whole tangent about different types of media that we might use. Like, I listen to a lot of podcasts about this era, but I think that would be a whole other episode, or, films inspired and that kind of thing.
We could do sequels to this,
We could, yeah, for sure. And I think we should and shall, because this is much fun. But does anyone have any finally book recommendations specifically? Or are we tapped?
I think whoever's gonna look at this long list, they've got a lot to jump into.
Yeah, for sure. So with that said, Finn, Matti, Johnny, one more time for Once More with Feeling. Where can everyone find you? Finn Ballard.
Thank you, Pip. Well, if you look up Finn Ballard Tours, you'll find me for sure. But the website is finn-ballard-tours.com, or on Instagram, just all one word, Finn Ballard Tours. Would be super to see you there.
Excellent. Professor Finn Ballard, thank you. And Matti Geyer.
The website is toursofberlin.com, and on Instagram it would be Berlin with Matti.
Excellent. And Johnny Whitlam.
Well, this should already be in one of my places, so...
Oh, yeah. I keep doing this.
That's totally fine.
Who let you in?
So my website, like always, will be down below, but you will come across the websites of Finn and Matti first. And a little look behind the scenes. Pip's website is either still in construction or is ready. When it is ready, this will be updated.
Yeah, there'll be a freaking website, okay?
I'm hanging you out to dry a little bit there. All four of us are available to show you around Berlin and delving into lots of different topics. Matti Geyer in particular has a tour of hidden sites that most people would never see and never find. And Finn Ballard is an expert on all things queer Berlin. And I've learned so much from you about that. And we all do highlights and Potsdam and all of these regular things as well. But we've all got our own little specialties. And so we're all worth booking. Book 4 tours.
Amazing. Thank you for organising this, Johnny Whitlam. And thanks again for this wonderful and very stimulating chat, might I say. So take care, everybody. And we'll see you on the streets.
Yes.
See you right there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right, that was it. I was going to do my little walking thing, but then I thought the view here is pretty cool. Let's have a look. Oh, that was a van. Down here you can see the new synagogue, the TV tower, right in the middle of Berlin here. So yeah, woof. I hope that you enjoyed the chat. I hope that it's inspired you to go and pick up some of these books. If you really did enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe on here. Make sure to check out my friends and their websites as well. Maybe give them a follow over on Instagram. Their links are down below. And of course, the links to all the books, again, are down below as well. I should say, not links. I couldn't work out the affiliate stuff. So yeah, just the raw text down there, which easier for you, huh? You know how to copy and paste. All right, that's it. Goodbye.